Hi, how are you? I'm Mr. Muso. Today we want to talk about the League of Nations. The League, we are talking about the coming together of several countries. And when they came together, they formed what was known as the League of Nations. How did they come together? It was because of Woodrow Wilson's last point on the so-called 14 points. You remember Woodrow Wilson on the Versailles settlement, he came up with what were known as the 14 points. And the 14 points stated that an organization was supposed to be formed that was supposed to guarantee peace in Europe. This organization was known as the League of Nations. So we are talking about European powers coming together, forming a league. And by so doing now, they were now responsible for guiding, observing, seeing that peace was restored in Europe. So that is our topic for today, the League of Nations. For example, before going into detail about this topic, we can think about league in our countries. We've got leagues for soccer teams playing in a league. We have got Manchester United. We have got also Arsenal. We have got also Chelsea. We have got also Tottenham. These are in a league, the English Premier League. In Zimbabwe, we have got Dimbare. In Zimbabwe, we have got Highlanders. In Zimbabwe, we have got Capes United. These clubs that are in a league. So that is called Soccer Premier League. But we are not talking about soccer today. We are talking about nations. Nations now coming together, putting their hands together, working together so that peace was going to be established. So that is our topic for today, the League of Nations. So let's move on now and talk about the aims of the League of Nations. What were their aims when they formulated this so-called the League of Nations? Aim number one, the League of Nations, it was formed so that they could guarantee peace in Europe. It was meant to make sure that Europe was not going to be plunged into another war like what took place in Europe in 1914 to 1918. They wanted to make sure that if conflicts, if disputes took place now, those conflicts were going to be brought to the League of Nations, and the League was going to amicably solve those problems. And by so doing now, it meant that a peaceful environment was going to prevail once again in Europe. So by so doing now, war was not going to occur. So they were worried about peace and peace and peace, making sure that peace was going to be everlasting. It was going to be guaranteed in Europe. They also met here so that they could consult each other time and again. Yeah, come here. Countries, let's gather. Countries, come again. Let's come and discuss. There is a problem that is taking place. There is a problem that is occurred. Come. And they could come, sit here, sit there. Then they could discuss. So that was their aim, consulting, cooperating, integrating, calling each other whenever disputes took place in Europe. And by so doing now, it meant that Europe was going to be peaceful, a peaceful environment. It was going to be established. Why? It is because it was going to act as a consultation forum where they were supposed to consult each other and discuss about the problems that were affecting Europe, that were affecting several countries that were in Europe. So that was a noble idea indeed. They also met here, they also formulated the League of Nations. Why? It is because they were interested in making sure that any country that was going to violate this league, it was supposed to be punished. So their aim again was to bring the aggressor, to call the aggressor, punish the aggressor, so that peace was not going to be disturbed in Europe. So we see the league playing a significant role here in Europe when it was formulated. The League of Nations, it was also formed, it was also formulated. Why? It wanted to check on countries that were going to violate peace in Europe. Remember, on the Versailles settlement, they discouraged the formulation of secret treaties. The countries were not supposed to sign secret treaties. Signing of secret treaties was discouraged. Increasing ammunition, increasing arms was discouraged on the Versailles settlement. So the league now, it was supposed to monitor now that countries were not signing secret treaties, because the signing of secret treaties plunged Europe into a war. So because of that now, they wanted to avoid that. So it was now their aim again to monitor that countries were going to adhere, they were going to follow what had been agreed, what had been adopted on the Versailles settlement. They also wanted to monitor the mandated territories. Remember, on the Versailles settlement, mandated territories were created. Germany lost so many of the areas, they became as mandates under the control of the League of Nations. So the aim of the League now, it was to monitor, to control, to see that those mandated areas were still intact. No one was going to disturb the mandated areas. They also were interested in protecting minor states from being attacked by big states. It was their role, it was their mandate to make sure that minor states were going to be protected from being invaded by the big powers. So these were some of the aims of the statesmen when they met on the Versailles settlement, when they formulated the League of Nations, the coming together of countries formulating this wonderful wonderful organization, which was known as the League of Nations. Let's move on and talk about the structure, the organs of the league. How did it operate? Yes, countries are now together. Countries are brought together, countries are invited, but they were supposed to have a mechanism, they were supposed to have a structure in which the league was supposed to operate, in which the league was to be a success. So we see them formulating a structure, we see them formulating a mechanism which was going to make the League of Nations a success. So let's look on the structure of the League of Nations. So this is how the League of Nations was organized. The League of Nations, LON, it means League of Nations. We had what was known as the council. We'll talk about this council in detail. We also had what was known as the General Assembly. We also talk about the General Assembly in detail. We also had what was known as the International Labour Organization, the ILO. International Labour Organization. We'll talk about the ILO in detail. We also had the Court of Justice. We'll also talk about the Court of Justice in detail. We also had what was known as the Secretariat. We'll also talk about the Secretariat in detail. So these were the organs of the League of Nations. Let's start with the assembly, the assembly. The assembly consisted of all countries that were prepared to join the League of Nations. Countries were invited to come and join the league. For example, at a school, there are specified dates in which all the students go for an assembly. At an assembly, A Form 1 student will be there, a Form 3 student will be also there, Upper 6 student will also be there. It is a meeting point. So the assembly was a meeting place for all the member countries. They were supposed to assemble. They were supposed to meet. So they met at the assembly. So when they assembled, when they met here, we see that they were supposed to discuss problems that were affecting Europe. They were supposed to debate on problems that were taking place in Europe, discussing it was a debating forum, debating about the problems that were taking place in Europe. They met only once a year. One time. They only met only once a year, only once one a year. And we see that when they met here, they also discussed about the finances of the league. So we also see them deliberating on the finances of what? Of the league. All the member countries in the assembly were equal. Even a small country such as Luxembourg. Luxembourg, it was a small country, but here it had also a say on the assembly. Hey, what's your problem, Luxembourg? I think we should do this and that. She was listened to. So we see that the assembly now, all the member countries, they were free to debate. All the member countries were free to deliberate, to suggest anything that they wanted to be suggested. All the member countries were equal. No one was too powerful, big than the other. All the countries were equal. So the assembly, it was a debating forum. It is, however, important to note this assembly, it was a failure. Why? It is because, number one, the time that they met, they only met once a year. That time was not adequate. They could not debate. They could not solve all the problems that were affecting Europe only in one day. So the assembly was a failure. Why? It is because the time was not enough for them to debate all the problems that were affecting Europe. It was also a failure. Why? It is because of serious disagreements. You know, whenever countries meet, whenever people meet, they will be discussing, and when they are discussing controversies, debates, motions will be passed, and countries won't be agreeing. So as a result of that, now they could not exhaust all the what are things that they wanted to discuss on this particular period of time, on this particular period of a period. Why? It is because they could debate, they could discuss, they could disagree. So because of that, now so many things were left hanging because the time was not adequate. So we see that the assembly, it was a failure. Let's move on and talk about the council. The council was the main decision body of the league. It consisted of 5 permanent members and 4 non-permanent members who were elected from time to time. The permanent members were Britain, Italy, Japan, France, and USA. Those countries that won the war in 1918, those countries that were known as the Allied powers, Britain, USA, Japan, Italy, and France. These were the permanent members. When the League of Nations was formed, Germany was not a permanent member. Russia was not a permanent member. Russia and Germany joined the council to become permanent members later on. But when Germany joined again, it is important to know that in 1933, Hitler moved out of the League of Nations. So we see that this council deliberated on most important decisions that were supposed to be taken by the League of Nations. The council met 3 times a year, and whenever there was a dispute, whenever there was a problem, the council was supposed to meet and discuss on the problems that were affecting Europe. We also see that this council, it was a failure to a greater extent. Why? It is because the members who were in this council, they did not trust each other. There was jealousy, there was suspicion, they suspected each other. So that on its own led to the failure of the council, they never trusted each other. For example, Britain and France never trusted each other. So as a result of that, now the council was less successful. And we are going to see that the members of the council were the members who violated the deliberations that were adopted on the Versailles settlement. We are going to see them signing secret treaties. We are going to see that in 1934, Britain and Germany signed the Stresersfront. Signing of secret treaties was forbidden on the Versailles settlement. We are going to see Mussolini of Italy. He was a member of the council, signing a secret treaty again with Hitler, the so-called the Rome-Berlin Axis. We are also going to see Hitler again signing an agreement with Italy and Japan, the so-called the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo Axis, the members of the council who were supposed to guarantee peace. Just like I can say, my name is Mr. Musso. I will be teaching you. My students, my students, it's not good to steal and to tell lies. Then you hear one day that, Mr. Musso passed through okay and he stole a chocolate. People say, but he always teaches that stealing is not good, but is the person. So we are saying that the council, it was less successful. Why was it less successful? It was because the 5 permanent members who were supposed to guarantee this peace in Europe did not trust each other. So because of mistrust now, it led the League of Nations to be a success to a lesser extent. So having said this now, we see that the League failed. Why? Because of the council. The members of the council did not trust each other. Then we move on and we talk about another organ, and this organ is known as the Secretariat. The Secretariat was important in the sense that it was responsible for the day-to-day running of the League. The first Secretary General was Eric Drummond from Britain. He was responsible for organizing minutes. He was responsible for taking down minutes. He was responsible for keeping the records of the League of Nations. So we see that the Secretariat played a significant role on the League of Nations. And the Secretariat, yet its headquarters in Switzerland, it was a success to a greater extent. Then we move on, we talk about another organ which is called the Court of Justice. This Court of Justice, it was responsible for solving disputes, for solving problems. You know, disputes were bound to occur. So when they occurred now, they were supposed to be surrendered. They were supposed to be given to the League of Nations. And the League of Nations now, it was supposed to deliberate now, solve problems. Don't fight against each other. It's not good to fight. And by so doing now, countries, they were reconciled. So the Court of Justice consisted of judges from different countries, and its headquarters were in Hague, Netherlands. It was meant to make sure that disputes were peacefully solved. Disputes were not going to continue taking place in Europe. So we see that the Court of Justice was significant on the League of Nations. Let's talk about the last organ, which is called the International Labour Organization. The International Labour Organization, international labor, to labor is to work. It was responsible for solving the problems of workers, working hours, pension, child labor, women labor. So it was supposed to deliberate on problems that workers were going to face in the country. It played a significant role in the sense that the problems of workers, they were solved. Workers now worked for 8 working hours. When they retired, they were now given pension. When they were injured at work, they were now compensated. Weekends were now regarded as holidays. They could rest during weekends. Child labor was condemned. Women labor was condemned. We also see that these are also advocated for the workers' committees. We see trade unions being formed that were supposed to represent the interest of workers. So the International Labour Organization, it was a success to a greater extent, because the conditions of workers improved as a result of the establishment of the International Labour Organization. So these are the organs that we see that we're supposed to spearhead, that we're supposed to play a significant part in the success of the League of Nations. So now let's move on and talk also about another aspect. We will now want to talk about the commissions of the League. The commissions of the League. These commissions of the League, they were supposed to assist the organs so that the League was going to be successful. And we had several of these commissions. For example, we had the Refugee Commission, we had also the Mandate Commission, we had the Slavery Commission. They played a significant role in assisting, in making sure that the work of the League was going to be a success. So these commissions, they were significant. These commissions, they were so important. They played an important part in the success of the League of Nations. So you can talk about some commissions. We also had the Food Commission. There was also the Health Commission. There was also the Slavery Commission. There was also the Mandate Commission that was responsible for the mandated territories. You talk about the Drug Commission that was supposed to see that dangerous drugs were not supposed to be exported or imported. The Disarmament Commission, which was responsible for disarmament, disarm, reduction of weapons. It played also an important part. The Women and Children Commission, it was also another commission that was responsible for the plight, for the problems of women and children. The Labor Commission, responsible for the plight of workers at different workplaces. The Minority Commission, that was responsible for minorities, those minority states that were created on the Versailles settlement. They were supposed to be administered by the Minority Commission. We also see that we had the Transport and Communication Commission. It was responsible for transport, communication. Again, it played a significant role. Hello, communicating and so forth. The Reparation Commission, responsible for the reparations that the defeated powers were made to pay. Then we had also the Economy and the Finances Commission. It was responsible for the economy and finances of the League of Nations. So they acted as aiders, they acted as helpers, making sure that the League of Nations was going to be a success. So let's now move on and talk about the successes of the League of Nations. Was the League of Nations successful, or it was successful to a lesser extent? So let's start with the positive, the successes of the League of Nations. So we'll talk about several successes that were done, that were performed by the League of Nations. Number one, we see that the League of Nations, it was in a position of solving disputes that took place between Finland and Sweden in 1920. So in 1920, Sweden and Finland, they were involved in a war. And when they were involved in a war over the Islands, and the League of Nations managed to solve that dispute between Sweden and Finland in 1920, that was a success. The League of Nations, it was also successful. Why? Because in 1921, there was a border dispute between Germany and Poland over Upper Silesia. So we see this dispute between Germany and Poland in 1929 over Upper Silesia being amicably solved by the League of Nations. So this was a success on the part of the League of Nations. We also see that in 1921, that same year, there was a dispute between Albania and Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia and Albania, then the league had to solve that problem. Yugoslavia, Albania, do stop what you are doing, don't fight. It was solved. That dispute was what? It was solved. In that same year, again, 1921, there was a dispute between Hungary and Czechoslovakia. They were also fighting Viennets, and Hungary stayed, Czechoslovakia stayed. That dispute again was solved. Then you talk about in 1925, there was a dispute again between Greece and Bulgaria, and the League of Nations was in a position of solving this dispute between Greece and Bulgaria in 1925. Then you also see that there was also a dispute between Turkey and Iraq over the Mosul. Turkey and Iraq were fighting over the Mosul, and the league decided that Iraq should keep the Mosul. So Iraq had to keep the Mosul after the League of Nations what deliberated on their dispute against Turkey. Then you also move on and also talk about it also managed to solve a border dispute between Colombia and Peru. Colombia and Peru over a border, and we see this dispute again being solved, a border dispute between Peru and Colombia. Then you also move on, it also managed to solve a border dispute between Bolivia and Paraguay. Paraguay and Bolivia, they fought against each other over over a border dispute, and the League of Nations, it was in a position of solving this dispute. So it was a success. So these are the disputes that involved what are countries. So as a result of that, now we are saying that the League of Nations, it was successful. Why? Because it managed to solve disputes that involved countries. The League of Nations, it was successful also. Why? Because if we consider some of the commissions of the League, we see that those commissions, they were a success to a greater extent. For example, the Food Commission, it was a success. It distributed food to those vulnerable people. The Health Commission, it was a success. It provided drugs to those people who were not feeling well. We are talking about medication. The Slavery Commission was successful. Slavery was also stopped. The Mandate Commission was successful. Mandated commissions, mandated areas, they were what are administered. It was a success. The Drug Trafficking Commission, it was successful. Why? Because the selling, the importation, exportation of drugs, it became a serious crime. Those who were caught doing that, they were arrested. They were jailed, sentenced to long terms. The Disarmament Commission, it was also successful. Why? It is because we see countries disarming because of this Disarmament Commission. The Women and Children Commission, it was successful. Women were protected, children were protected. They were no longer abused, especially those people who used to abuse them in mines, abuse them in industries. That became a thing of the past. The Labor Commission, again, it was a success. Why? Workers' rights were now upholded. Workers were now working for 8 hours. So it was a success. Then the Minority Commission, these minority areas, they were administered. This was a success again to a greater extent. The Reparation Commission, it was a success. Why? It is because Germany continued paying the reparations on the that she was made to pay on the Versailles settlement. So it was a success. So you can talk about these successes again that were performed by different commissions of the League of Nations. Let's talk about the last aspect, which is the failures of the League of Nations. The League of Nations, however, it failed. Why are we saying that it failed? It was because of the Versailles settlement. It was because of Mussolini and Hitler. The rise of dictators led to the failure of the League of Nations. Let's start with Hitler. We see that the League of Nations failed because of Hitler. His acts of aggression led to the failure of the League of Nations. Why do we say so? Hitler, we see him taking the Tsar Basin in 1934. the League was supposed to act. Since it was saying it was going to protect a small states, we see that the Saar Basin, a plebiscite was held, and the Saarlanders, they voted for their incorporation to Germany. Nothing was done to Hitler when he retook the Saar Basin. Hitler went on to take the Rhineland. Nothing was done to Hitler when he remilitarized the Rhineland. We also see that Hitler went on to sign the Stresser Front with Britain in 1934, signing of secret treaties. The League was supposed to act, it did not act. Britain, as a member of the council, was not supposed to do so, but we see signing secret treaties that led to the failure of the League of Nations. We also see Hitler in 1936 signing the Rome-Berlin Axis with Mussolini, 1937 signing the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo Axis. The League was supposed to act and stop the signing of secret treaties, but it did not do anything. It led to the failure of the League. Mussolini and Hitler in 1936, they assisted General Franco in the Spanish Civil War. General Franco staged a coup d'etat. They were supposed to protect Spain, but we see these two leaders assisting General Franco. The League was supposed to act, it did not act. So that led to the failure of the League. Then we see Hitler again taking the Anskulas, taking Sudetenland, taking Czechoslovakia, the League again not acting. So the acts of aggression that were committed by Hitler led to the failure of the League of Nations. We also see that Mussolini committed acts of aggression in 1935. He invaded Ethiopia, Abyssinia. The League did not act. And we also see that Mussolini and Hitler signing our secret treaties. Again, the League did not act. So because of that now, we can say that the League was less successful. Why? Because they never stopped Mussolini and Hitler from invading, attacking small states. The League was also not successful. Why? The absence of USA. USA was the brainchild of the League of Nations. So she was supposed to be part and parcel of the League, but we see that she never joined the League of Nations. So the absence of USA paralyzed, crippled the League of Nations, and it was less successful. Then you also talk about the army. The League of Nations did not have a standing army. It was a toothless bulldog that was barking, but not taking any action. Why? It is because it did not have a standing army. That led to the failure of the League. The Great Depression also affected the League of Nations. Countries were affected by the Great Depression that took place in Europe. So that on its own again contributed to the failure of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was also less successful. Why? It was because it did not have enough finances. So because of that now, it could not succeed. Why? Because it did not have enough money. So it led again to its failure. The League of Nations failed. Why? It is because the Council, the body that was supposed to guarantee the success of the League, the countries that were in this body did not trust each other. Jealousy and suspicion contributed to the failure of the League. If these countries were united, if these countries trusted each other, if they cooperated, it meant that it was going to be a success, but they did not trust each other. So that on its own again contributed to the collapse of the League of Nations. So it explains why Europe on 1 September 1939 was plunged into another war, the Second World War. Why? It was because of the failure of the League of what? Of Nations. The League could not protect small states. Japan invaded Manchuria. The League was supposed to act, but it imposed half-hearted sanctions. So we are seeing that the very countries that were supposed to make this League a success, they were the very countries that were violating the success of the League of Nations. Therefore, to a greater extent, the League, we see that its failures were, its successes were outweighed by its failures. There were so many failures than the success, so we can say that it failed. But although it failed, it managed to maintain peace for a reasonable period of time. Almost 40 years took place in Europe before another war took place again. So we can say that it was somehow a success, although there were so many failures. So that is what we have on this topic, the League of Nations. Thank you so much. I'm Mr. Muso.